U.S. as well, and around the world. And governments have basically let them do it. The governments, in my mind, and in my observations, have been that governments have greased the wheels very nicely for big corporations, and media is one area where they've certainly done that. And as a result, these big corporations are slashing the number of working journalists, reporters, whatever you want to call them, news media, in this country. I know some of you, but I'll just here's where I get a bit of a blow to my. How many of you knew who I was, or who I am, and what I did up until just recently? Okay.
I don't.
All right. So that's good. How many of you heard what happened to me and 5 of my colleagues last month?
A little bit.
A little bit. Okay. How many read about it in the Gleaner?
Irving paper.
Irving paper. Sorry, Charles.
I don't read the
Okay. How many of you heard it on the CBC?
Yeah.
Okay. How many heard of it on News 88.9? Okay. How many saw it on CTV or heard it on one of our radio stations, or my former company radio stations? Nobody. You didn't hear it. You didn't see it on CTV. You didn't hear it on the privates because they're owned by Bell Media, and that's the company that fired me. So, I guess what I'm suggesting is that when, well, that's not the most earth-shattering story in the world. Big deal. Okay, 6 people get laid off by a media company. However, it was clearly a story. I mean, if the Irving papers thought it was a story, the CBC thought it was a story, News 88.9 thought it was a story, which is the Rogers group of news stocks. So the judgment by a good number of working journalists in this province felt that this was a story that should be covered. Those who rely on Bell Media, which now, by the way, is by far the largest media company in this country. They were probably the largest before they acquired Astro Media. Astro Media was probably the 2nd largest in the company, and now they've combined forces. So anybody who relied on Bell Media for their information didn't know about that story. Now, as I said, the world's not going to come to an end because that story didn't get on. But it begs the question, what else are we missing? What else are the Bell Medias not covering? What else are the Newfoundland Cap or Newcap group of stations not covering? Because they have a corporate interest in what they're doing. And that's the danger. That is a very real danger, and again, most people don't really recognize that as a danger. So what else are we missing? I think we're missing an awful lot. I think we only hear just a small fraction of things that we should hear about and should know about if we're going to live in a democratic society. Now, in this country, we have twice as many communications specialists, communications officers in governments than we have reporters.
Wow.
And by the way, communications officers in government on average earn twice as much as those working journalists. So we have twice as many people trying to hide or spin the truth.
And filter that.
Yeah, spin.
Spin.
They're trying to hide, basic, and that's what they
That's
do.
their job.
That's their job, is to protect the minister or whatever. Their job is to hide or so you have twice as many people paid twice as much trying to hide and spin the truth than you have people trying to uncover it. And that makes it really difficult, extremely difficult for media to hold government and big business accountable. And that's basically what their job is supposed to be. And that's exactly how they like it, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Government, that's how they want it. They want us as dumbed down as possible. That's not a secret. I mean, you listen to any politician in opposition, and they'll talk about how the government is trying to hide and blah blah blah, and that, you know, we need openness and we need transparency and we need accountability until they're elected, and then all that goes out the door. All of a sudden, it's not good to be open and transparent, and so, you know, it's something that has happened. Gradually, but steadily and progressively through the years. Now, in the case of Bell Media, this is, as I said, this is a mess. I mean, we all know Bell Media. They were able to spend I think it was 3.4, maybe it was 3.1, but it was definitely over $3 billion to buy Astro Media. And again, this is something that I paid a lot of attention over the almost 2-year process because obviously our company was involved. And it got rejected once by the CRTC, and I'll tell you, I've never been happier. Not because I was worried, because I wasn't particularly worried about my job. I didn't know that my job would be affected. I was just happy because I know when the CRTC turned that deal down initially, there were a lot of pissed off millionaires. Yeah. And that just made me happy as punch that these millionaires were not going to get to line their pockets. Unfortunately, as government agencies do, you know, dot this I, cross that T, just rejig the thing and they come back and it gets approved. You know, I watch a fair bit of TV. I don't know whether you, just to give you the idea of how big a company Bell Media is now. I mean, flip through your channels. I mean, there's CTV, there's CTV2, there's TSN, there's TSN2, there's Discovery. I mean, almost every network you turn on now, they'll have that little thing and they'll go, you know, a Bell Media company. I mean, they've got so much it's not even funny. It has now has radio stations in almost every market in the country. Now, when it was trying to persuade the CRTC that this was a good deal for Canadians, you know, this is a good deal for Canadians, they said, now, there would be, and look, even the most unreasonable person would acknowledge that, okay, you're buying a big company, there's going to be some duplication, there's going to be some redundancies, you know, you're going to have front office people that are doing the same thing, blah, blah, blah. So they said the only job loss, there would be some job loss, but it would be redundancies. Well, you can't get Bell Media now to comment on anything as to how many people have lost their jobs. There's a friend of mine from Fredericton, his name is Ted Bird, who has worked for years in Montreal. He was working for TSN Radio. He got his walking papers last week. Just by what I've heard anecdotally, they've fired roughly 500 people across the country. And these aren't head office people. These aren't people with redundancies. These are people in local newsrooms across the country. And I can tell you that there's no redundancies in local newsrooms across the country. So one has to, but yet I've had nobody, I haven't heard a politician, I haven't heard a media outlet, you know, challenge Bell Media as to how this deal is good for Canadians. How can you gut your local newsrooms across the country and say that that is good for, you know, if you can, fine. I'm a person who is wrong a lot of the time, but I need to be convinced. I need a logic. So if I would just like to hear the president of Bell Media, when faced with the question, how did eliminating this local newsroom and this local newsroom and this local newsroom, how is that good for Canadians? I would like to hear the answer to that. See how they try to justify that. They can't, but nobody's challenged them on it. I've been wrong, like I say, I'm wrong a lot of the times. There's been times I've picked up my phone bill and I've got, this is not right, and I've picked up the phone and I've said, what's going on? What's this charge all about? And they'll explain it to me and I'll say, oh, okay, my bad, I've got it. But you don't get that from big business. You don't get that from government. You get just because. And the only person that gets away with just because with me is my mother. Why do I have to do that? Because I'm your mother. Okay. But other than my mother, just because is not,
It's not good enough.
you know, you got to justify it. So, you know, Bell Media never said during this whole process that once we buy, and they did this fast. I mean, they had us less than a month, and I was out the door. They never said once during this whole process that we're going to go across the country and we're going to eliminate local news in all these markets. And again, nobody's challenged them on it yet. And it's not just Bell Media. It's been happening, I'm not sure what year it was, but it's probably been at least 20 years. There once was a time when you got a broadcast license in this country. In order to get a license from the CRTC, you had to make a commitment to cover and carry local news and information. You had to have a commitment of so many hours per week, and that was a condition of your license. Well, you know, big business doesn't like regulations. So when big business, you know, and that was, you know, and this, by the way, was in place when most radio stations were owned locally. You know, this is when Malcolm Neal owned CFNB and Jim Ross owned C-High. And so this cumbersome requirement, and you know, radio stations felt, you know, especially small markets, that, you know, if you had to produce 7.5 hours of news a week, you know, that was basically, you could run your jukebox, but you had to, you were required to do that. So when the onus was on the small players in this, that was it. Well, once the big corporations started snapping up radio stations and other media outlets, all of a sudden, oh, you know, they go knocking on government's door, and you know, this, you know, that's an awful thing. Anyway, so the CRTC said, okay, you don't have to have local news anymore. So ever since that decision has been made, you know, I understand. I'm certainly not a socialist, although I probably have socialist tendencies. However, in some areas, but the older I get and the smarter I get, the more I realize that when it comes to big business, you can't trust them to do the right thing. You can't just assume they're going to do the right thing.
Well,
Because they don't. Because their pure motive is to make more money.
Yeah.
Profit. That's what they're after. And so, you know, they convince the government or the CRTC, oh, these are onerous. You know, we'll still run the news. We'll still, but they didn't have to, and so now they don't. When I became news director in